Hello, and welcome to Dice Night. My name's Casey Cool, and this is a show where we talk about everything tabletop role-playing games, in between the actual play of some tabletop games with me and my closest friend. My guest tonight is professional GM, content creator of Allfather Games, Bronson. Bronson, thank you for joining me tonight on the show.
How's it going? I'm glad to be here.
Dude, it's really fun. It's going good. It's excellent that I'm talking to you. I've been following your Instagram page because I'm too old to have TikTok. Actually, it's not allowed in our house.
Right.
My wife's work, they don't let her have it, and so we have to work on it. So and just like everybody my age, I see all the cool TikTok memes 2 weeks later on Instagram.
Yeah.
So your videos are great. They always reside in hit. When did you start doing the content creating with? The
Oh
D&D
man.
videos?
So I actually started the account talking about board games in general, tabletop
Mhm.
board games, and that slowly evolved into just tabletop role-playing games, and then really focused in on kind of Dungeons and Dragons. But we've kind of broadened things back out to tabletop in general, and I'd say it's coming up on 2 years of me actually like consistently participating in Instagram.
Yeah, are they built in within each other these days now too, where it's just you upload to one and it's easy to upload to the other, or is it a process for you?
It's relatively easy, I guess. They try to play well, understanding that everybody's creating and putting things on everything as much as possible. But at the end of the day, Facebook and Instagram definitely isolate themselves from TikTok for sure. So
Yeah. Well, and TikTok, just I think the big part seems to me is the video editing is so nice, and then there's a trend, and you can always relate the trend to, oh, this is like my hobby, but this.
right.
And I really like a lot of the things you do. I send your videos and a couple others to my D&D group at least once a week or something that I find of yours that struck a chord. You got some really great stuff, like this one, the prep work one. You put up one about prep work this week, and I was like, oh no, that's me. Like I took the advice. I'm like, I do need to do some D&D prep.
Yeah, that was actually so just a couple days yesterday on Instagram. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was like, hey, guess what? Don't forget.
yeah. No, it haunted me. I'm like, he's right. It's like you're my D&D conscience, and I was like, I can blow it off because I hear like there's people that talk to me about doing games just shooting from the hip, and obviously in D&D you have to shoot from your hip a little bit, but I could imagine not prepping at some form, right, to do a good job for your group.
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting topic for me. And I think I am a big proprietor of yes, do the prep, but at the end of the day, we have to prepare to improv. We have to be
Yeah,
prepared for heck, we know that whatever we do, it doesn't matter. Our players are going to do something different. And
they're
so
gonna do the
preparing
worst
ourselves,
possible thing, right?
yeah, exactly. So
Always.
preparing ourselves for that is extremely important. And so just preparing to be flexible, I think, is uh, my big takeaway in all of that is, yeah, you can prep all you want, but at the end of the day, they're going to do something different. So prep in a way that's helpful for that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think too, you can't be too rigid because you don't want to. I think one of the scariest things to be called is a railroad DM. That's something I worry about. And oh, the things I know, All Father's Games is my favorite. Good job. I'm glad you're here. Good. We get to talk to him. He's one of my favorites too. Yeah, I was telling you before the show, I work in education. I run the Dungeon Dragons or tabletop role playing game club at my school.
Awesome.
And so I'm playing with any range of 10 to 12-year-old, right? And they're pretty wild with what they want to do, and you have to improv. Because either they want to be murder hobos or they want everything to be their pet. And you got to find that happy medium. At what point does it become consequences for players, too, based on you want to give them what they want, but you have to let them know there's some hard lines, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the real kicker there is we can do whatever you want. We can do that. That's totally acceptable. But you need to understand there's going to be a consequence for
Oh,
that. Just
yeah,
like life, like is we're not running a simulation here. That's not
right.
the purpose of tabletop role playing games. But at the end of the day, if I don't present you with a consequence, we are just going to murder hobo around. And okay, if that's what we want to do, that's fine. Let's roll up a villainous campaign and we'll just
Yeah,
disregard the consequences and throw that out the window and let's
yeah,
go for it. Sure.
yeah.
But that's not always the point, and that's not necessarily the story that the whole table wants to tell.
Right. I was explaining to the kids too, because I had one kid today, and he was just trying to. I go, we don't want main character energy,
Mm.
right? Everybody's a character on the table, and you'll have your moment in the sun, but like, don't want to make it all about you. I'm trying to teach these young groups what to not do, and I think that's a big part too. Because like one of them today wanted to just poison a whole group of people saying a prayer for their dead sailors, and in my head, I was like, okay, I was like, do I let them do it, or is there going to be a consequence, right? And either it's for kids that's so creative sometimes, but sometimes it's just like, nope, you can't. You got to learn how to play within the rules. Have you
Right.
ever had that at an adult table that you ran where someone's just trying to
You
like
know,
take over?
I started playing tabletop role playing games with a game called Phoenix Dawn Command.
Okay.
I didn't start with D&D. I started with it's a card driven, so it's a deck builder.
Okay.
And starting with that got me into tabletop, and then eventually I deployed to Afghanistan, and
I
I
was
ran a
okay.
lot of Dungeons and Dragons in Afghanistan.
See,
Uh,
I was gonna say because I saw on your page the pictures from the military, and I found that was fascinating. So you did a lot. You started your D&D passion really while you were in the trenches.
so it started at the family with the table sort of
Okay.
thing.
Okay.
Had a brother-in-law and a friend and some cousins sort of thing, and that's where I got started. But then that's one weekend, one session a month or two
Right.
sessions a month sort of thing. But while I was in Afghanistan, I was running probably 3 sessions a week
That's awesome.
at various bases all around Afghanistan, just whoever I could get to play. And it was actually incredible because you would find, regardless of rank, so you'd have the lowest of the private to I'd had colonels at my table, so relatively high managerial positions, if you want to refer
Yeah,
to it
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Correct. Made my eyebrows raised when I heard that. Yeah.
And so having all of these different types of people at the table, you do find that there are some that inevitably, to circle back to the question, there are some personalities that will try to run away with it.
Does the colonel like pull rank? Like, I believe that's a nat 20 soldier. Like,
Uh,
yeah, it is. You know what? Hey.
that would be funny, but
No,
no, they were
right,
all
right, right.
very respectful of the story and the authority behind the screen and everything.
Right, right.
Um, but it is something that you do have to address, and sometimes there are people at your table, not to bring down the mood or anything. There are people at your table where you might need to call them out for their behavior, and that's okay,
Yeah,
as long as you're doing it respectfully and
right.
communicating expectations ahead of time. That's why session 0 is so important. That way we all understand, hey, like, this main character energy from you, this main character syndrome, if you want
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
that's not what we're playing for here.
You were talking about how you have Midwest roots, and so my grandmother's from the Midwest. Like, she's from Nebraska, and she was loved board games. That's where I got passion board games. But very big into gaming etiquette. Like, you hold your cards a certain way. You take that, and I think with D&D, there's no etiquette book really for D&D yet. There is like standard etiquette, but like for me, I always tell kids, don't tell someone how to play their turn. That's one of
Mm.
like the rudest things you can do. What do you think are some big etiquette things that you said at your table?
That's a really good question, and perhaps
Thanks.
one that I
Thanks. I
haven't thought
love that
about
you're giving me
before.
all these good question remarks. I'm feeling really great about myself. Just keep it coming. I'm so good.
I got you. I will build you up all night, Casey. Don't worry.
Yeah, good, good.
Um, so man, thinking about that etiquette at my table.
And in the chat too, if you have any things about etiquette at the table, feel free to throw that in. Yeah, etiquette at the
Oh,
table. I think
okay.
it's an unwritten thing though, too, to me. Like it's there's people have rules that pass down, but there's nothing that's really clear because everyone's by the DM guide is not about how to hold yourself. It's just about how to run the mechanics, right?
Right. And so I think that at the end of the day, the biggest piece of tabletop role playing etiquette is respecting the fact that the dungeon master, the game master, is the final arbiter of the rules.
Mm-hmm.
That the the unwritten rule of, Gary Gygaxism, if you will.
Yeah.
Hey, if it is as much as you can, don't abuse that authority.
Yeah.
But then everybody else at the table needs to also respect that authority. That like, hey, you know what? For right now, because of rule of cool or whatever, I understand that we're going against that rule. I want to see what happens, and let's just go
Yeah.
with it. And then
Yeah.
everyone just needs to be okay with that. And
The rule
so,
of cool is a big one too, right? Yeah.
yeah. So that's a tough one. That's a tough one.
For me, like my players, because sometimes I've been playing only for so many years now, but I trusting my players, like in my personal home game group, that they have a good understanding of their character and
Hmm.
how their character mechanic works. But I
Ooh,
also think
yeah.
something good at a table is being open to looking at the rules together too. Right? It's
Yeah.
okay for the DM to go, well, let's double check that rule. It's a big book. I can't remember everything, and I'll pull it up. I know some people actually, the game for them is being the rules lawyer too. Well,
Yeah.
actually, they want to get you there.
So
But
I have an anecdote on this
okay, go
actually.
ahead. Love
So
to hear
I
it.
have a really good table. I've got a couple of dungeon masters, like people that have experience being a dungeon master playing at my table. And so there will be times where they will come to me with, hey, the rule actually says this, but then they always give the caveat, but I understand like whatever you say goes here. And never, so here's why I'm saying this to people: never be afraid to have someone, hey, read the spell for me,
Yeah,
go ahead and pull up that rule. Hey, what's the rule on drowning? Can someone pull that up real quick? And then you read through it and you listen to it, and then you come up with an arbitration of how we're going to play it out, because
yeah,
that's the whole thing about tabletop role playing. That's why we enjoy the communal storytelling, is because there's no way for us to possibly plan for every little thing.
for
No
sure.
way we can do it, no way they could do it when they wrote the book. And so we have to sometimes kind of make it up and say, well, based on the wording, we're going to go ahead and do this instead. That's okay.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think it's also respecting, like you said, going back to the DM's final say. But small home roll. I don't take the dice if it fell off the table. I think that's a great roll too, right?
Mm,
But you have to be honest with that. You don't just take it if it's a low roll. If you get a nat 20, right? That's the thing you have to do there. Um, but like you're saying too, the DM has to make that final call. But sometimes too, you got to eat crow because you read the rule wrong. You're like, oh, my
oh
bad.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's see that. But rule cool sometimes it's just fun. I We did it on our actual play. We were doing someone did charm person, and there's these polar bears in Icewind Dale. And he's like, hey, go pet these polar bears because they're fighting goblins. They're really friendly. And they had killed a couple other people because someone threw a goblin into it. And I thought that was just so funny. I'm like, yeah, it worked because he had a high roll for the charm. But charm person isn't really about like go, it's not command.
Right.
But to me, I think the person was gullible enough. And it was just, I like good role playing too. So
Yeah.
sometimes when the table's cool, if you've been in the rules, it's really fun. Have you looked at startgames.com,
So
the start playing games or playing games with the professional DMs and
I
GMs?
actually haven't. No.
I've had a few people on from the show and the creator of that when we're doing just regular underpowered, and it's really interesting. It's for professional DMs and they run hourly rates. We had the first episode, Dan Munoz. He's a professional DM on Start Playing. He runs like 4 or 5 games a week and gets paid an hourly rate. And I think that's an interesting thing too, because when you're paying to play, people want things a certain way, but you want to teach them like, no, like if you want to instill the love of the game,
Right.
right? And it's kind of hard there because if I've asked him like, well, like how many games a week do you run? I guess is where I'm getting, and I'll get back to this thought train.
How many I run?
Yeah, like how many game are you playing? A monthly game, a weekly game? What's your poison?
So I run one game a week,
Nice.
but I run 4 campaigns concurrently.
So it's 4 different groups.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, what are the sizes of range?
I will not go over 6 players, and I won't play with less than 3.
See, I'm with you there too. I think there's some sweet spot. I think the sweet spot is uh 3 players in the GM or 4 players in the GM. That 6
Yeah.
is about as far as I'll go to, because like I'm again with the kids. I'm trying to do an 11-person game and it drags, right?
Ooh,
And they're
yeah.
learning. You have to stretch things because none of them want to DM at that age. They want someone to make up the game for them.
So here's actually, I know this
Take
wasn't
it.
in like the list of anything. I've got something for you.
Go ahead.
Um,
Hey, the list is very loose. It rule of cool. Like go with the
yeah, right.
combo. Yeah.
So I had a large group. So we were maxed 6 players. It was large for me.
Yeah.
Um, but I tried for the first time what I called an extended combat check.
Okay.
So rather than running the combat, with initiative and turn for turn, I said, okay, the DC was essentially the armor class for the combat session,
Okay.
and said, hey, the armor class of this troll that you're fighting is 18. What are you doing to contribute to the combat? And we role played the combat,
Yeah.
and it went really, really
Oh,
surprisingly
that's
well.
cool.
Yeah, and so I had a player say, "Oh, well, with my medicine, I'm going to pull out my medicine kit and I'm going to make a medicine check to uh, concoct like a quick brew potion to counteract the troll's regeneration. So something to like fight the troll's regeneration." I said, "Okay, make a roll for it." And I rolled a 22. Awesome. The troll no longer has its regenerative abilities.
Oh,
And so we just
nice.
kind of role played through, okay, what are you doing to contribute to the combat? And it was a really great way to condense the 3-hour combat session into a 30-minute role play where everyone had, their 2-minute turn, really moved through it really well. And we were able to handle what would have been a drag as you wait 15 minutes for your next turn into, oh, it's my turn again. Okay, well, I'm going to do this now. And we really told a great story through the combat. And so I recommend you try it sometime.
Yeah.
Give it a shot.
I'm okay with doing that. I'm okay with something I realized today. How often are you using random tables in your games? Are you a big random table guy?
I am actually not a big random
Okay.
table guy. I believe that players should perceive randomness, but that there is never actually anything random going on behind the screen.
Sure. Yeah, there's some. You don't want to keep them think. You want them to think they're not on railroads when they're actually on rails the whole time. No, I fully get that because you have like a main story and they divert from it. But I like for a fresh game from after, like session one, like I have a table. It's 200 sea encounters
Mhm.
because I did an ocean thing at the beginning, and it's just like random events. Like you find a gold statue. How do you It's for RPing purposes,
Okay.
personally. Kind of like how you think about item table will
Yeah.
go in there. I love a good random roll. We have a mechanic too. We have a duck in that Icewind Dale game. And are you a big video game player at all?
I play some video games.
Okay. Have you heard of the Untitled Goose Game where you're the goose that just annoys people and chases, and it's like a puzzle game?
I've heard it. I've seen memes
Okay,
about it,
yeah.
but yeah.
So the person is a BM hunter, but he's level 1. And I was like, we can't use your pet at level 1, but because he actually has ducks. So we said, okay, I'll give you a random like action table for the duck, and the duck ended up being a huge narrative for the first levels because of how it just screws things up. But I found with a big group of kids or kids that are afraid to RP, if you give them the random event, they'll just play it, right? For people,
Right.
because I think sometimes it's really hard is how deep do you I like a deep RP, but that's hard for some people to talk or do a voice, and that's not everyone's thing. But when you give them something to play out, it helps lead that. And then you kind of like, because how veteran are your players in those groups that you play with?
Well, by this point, a lot of them are pretty veteran. Just wrapped up a 2-year campaign where
Okay,
they started off totally green, but just wrapped them up, and so we're getting ready to start up another campaign. So whenever I do have someone fresh come to the table, it is generally with a table of veterans. So it's
sure,
bringing in one fresh person
one
to,
fresh.
3 or 4 other veterans. So yeah,
But watching them get progressively better at the thing maybe they're weak at is it's the best, right?
it
Like
really is the
you
best.
see someone that's afraid to RP, and then by session 10, they're like they are their character. They'll talk in character, they'll have a conversation, you'll buy in. It's the magic of the game.
It
And
really is.
and then or just for your character, for people, I give a tip too. If you don't like to talk a lot, just make your character be a silent type, but do things through action. Like my
Hmm.
character does this. Um, so I love that you're starting your second campaign. How many of these people are you playing with that you met in the military?
One of them actually,
Okay.
only one. A lot of others have been from all over the country, all over the world, and so they are in all of those places.
So is like, do those events from playing with them and playing with your little group, is that what inspires your videos sometimes, or how do you make, what's your process for making your clips, your funny videos?
Okay, well, the biggest thing is finding pertinent problems, right? Relatable content. For
Right.
instance, I made one today about how I mentioned to my wife that I've got this cool idea for my campaign, and it gets like a "good job, dear" on
Yeah,
it was on
like
Instagram. Would
a
be that
petted
one.
head. Oh, I can put it on Instagram. I can pull that up right here. Um,
Yeah, it was essentially just like a thanks, babe. That was tender. Like, why you all you do is talk about this like all the time. Yeah, blue shirt right there in
yeah,
the
yeah,
middle.
yeah,
There
yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
this one right here. And it's just literally like the despair that you feel inside as you just kind of get patted on the head when you were looking for
that's
more,
amazing.
Yeah, right.
Tell me
Um,
more, because the thing that people really need to know is if you're a DM, when you just want to talk about your campaign to somebody, you
yeah,
want to tell,
exactly.
especially someone in D&D, right?
Yep.
Does your wife ever play with you?
No, actually, no, she does
Yeah,
not.
no interest, right?
Well, she played with me
Oh,
once right when I first started out. I think it was just to humor me.
of
I
course.
was I was interested in this new thing. I was starting to play role playing games. Hey, babe, come play. And like she played, and she never played again.
No, she's like, not for
So I
me.
don't know if it's just not her thing or what, but I've tried to convince her to come back to the table, and she's just like, "No, you've got friends for that."
Yeah. No, I someone in the chat things I know. Tell them about the white elephant. What is the white elephant? Do you know what they're referring to?
Oh, so the white elephant. What we did is we did a white elephant character exchange.
Oh, sick.
And so what you did is you made a character that you would be willing to play, had a couple items for it, fifth level, and all you folded up the character sheet, and then you wrote the stat modifiers on the
Ooh.
outside of the package as like the wrapping paper. And so all you knew is, okay, this thing's got a +5 in strength, but it's got a
Nice.
-2 in intelligence. Like, okay, so maybe it's a barb, and all right, I'll take that one. And you open it up, it's a barb wizard, and it's just like a
Oh,
horrible
cool,
wizard
cool.
build. And it's just like, what is this, man? Like, and so then we did a big character exchange where you picked, and so we played it white elephant style, and so you could steal. Oh, I want to play a sorcerer tonight, and so you took that character from that player, and it was a really fun kind of Christmas season one shot that I did with all the players that wanted to come and enjoy that. So
That's awesome. We've always
yeah,
talked about doing an evil Christmas campaign where you fight Santa. I think that would be a fun one. No, we did a session. I needed a break because I coach in the fall, and we did
same.
this one shot. And the one shot was, we found someone posted this thing on Twitter, and I wish I could find it. It was your zodiac sign tied to a race, a character, and a class.
Ooh, that
And
might have been D&D Imposter. She's
I
pretty
think
good about
so.
doing that
Yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And it was like Virgo was a Teflon wizard, right? And your background was sage. It gave you your background or something like that, right? That you had to run.
Hmm.
And so it was interesting because like everyone had to play something they usually normally wouldn't play. And our one buddy who's a monk in our main campaign had to play a warlock warforged. And after that session, he's like, I really like warlocks. He was not into the idea, and he's like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. I think that's like, if for newer players, I wouldn't recommend that if you're out listening or watching this right now. But I think picking a class is really, it's kind of like picking your Mario Kart character. It says a lot about your personality, you know?
Now you got me curious. What's your Mario Kart
Oh,
character?
man, Yoshi always. And Donkey
Really?
Kong. Yeah, I look like Donkey Kong and I'm built like Donkey Kong, but I like the speed, man. I like the acceleration. I got some wheels.
Yeah,
I like
I'm a
to go
Toad
quick.
player
Oh,
myself.
there you go.
Yeah.
I think Toad's great. Toad and Yoshi kind of the same camp. Quick
Yeah.
turning. Yeah, 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 for sure. For sure. What was so are you forever DM or do you get to play ever?
I actually prefer to DM.
Oh,
So
okay.
So yes, I am a forever DM, but it's self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted.
I
Okay.
have a couple really great players that are willing to run, a 3 shot every now and again and give me a break if I want it. But at the end of the day, I always find myself on the player side of the screen, and I
Pollution.
can't help but
Good pick.
want back.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
want back behind the screen because it's a creative outlet for me. It's about
Same.
creating the world, and it's about that world building for me. That's where I really find the joy, is kind
Yeah.
of administering the story rather than
Right.
being the protagonist.
Well, and you get to be everything else, right? As the
Right.
DM, that's the thing I remind myself. So I'm sure you have played as a player though.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So what was your first class? What was your go-to? Was like, well, this is the thing I'm playing first.
Oh, so I'm a cleric.
Oh, I see that. I see
Yeah,
that. Talking to okay,
hands
dwarf.
hands down, a dwarven utility cleric.
Of course, I knew it. I knew
Yeah,
it. Good man.
I'm all about uh, kind of the
Support.
battlefield management. I
Mhm.
don't mind a little AOE control magic. I enjoy supporting the other players so that they can, whip out some crazy stuff. I
Yeah,
really enjoy that.
nice. See, I'm a ranger, and I get so much of a hard time. I think rangers are great if you know how to build them right.
Yes. Yes. I
Yes.
definitely agree with that. Anyone who craps on like the player handbook ranger, it's because you didn't communicate with your dungeon master about what you're doing, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still a great class. There's
It
nothing
is.
wrong with it.
And if you're first survival, but the other thing too, I'm also a believer in multi-classing. I think
Mhm.
there's some ability in that too. But in finding items that help your character. If anybody wants a
Yeah.
good ranger, those archer bracers at the beginning and you go archery, man, right? You'll never miss. And that's the thing. When people start noticing, hey, this guy has a +9 to hit. How is he never missing?
Right.
And it's just you build them right at the beginning, right? You go full decks, all decks. Are you a feat guy or stat guy?
I actually enjoy the feats.
Same.
And I enjoy the kind of the like I said, I'm a utility player, so I
Yeah.
enjoy kind of the role play feats, the things that allow me to shine outside of combat. So
Yeah.
I'm always willing to take like the actor feat or the
Nice.
other things like that that will kind of spice up what I do outside of the combat.
Yes, I like the feat that allows you to read lips and it gives you a +5
Yeah.
to perception because what it's great for other things. I like to investigate. I want to honor the puzzle that the DM gives sometimes too. Like I love a good puzzle and I'll sit there and be like, we can do this for hours. This is great. Um, but I think like everybody makes mistakes with their characters too, and also I think rangers are important to world building. And you do a
Hmm.
lot of videos about world building. I noticed,
Yeah.
right? So what's your big? How do you start world building? Because you're doing all these different campaigns. Is it you have
Yeah.
one line, or is it the physical world? Where do you begin?
So I tell everybody to start at the smallest microcosm of the culture. So whatever that culture revolves around, start at the smallest version of that culture.
Okay.
And so if you are taking, for instance, the classic medieval fantasy setting, right?
Hmm.
We can always the first thing that we think of, the smallest microcosm of the culture is the inn, it's the tavern.
Yeah.
And so
All
start
great stories begin in a tavern,
right,
right?
you start with that tavern and then you build out and you build, okay, what's next to the tavern? Oh, there's an armorer there and there's a magic shop across the street and you're in this town and who runs the town and how big is the town? And then you're into the region and then okay, so economically speaking, why does this region exist? What's going on here that's happening? And then you build out and out and out and out from that point. And that can be applied to any setting, not just medieval fantasy. Take a sci-fi setting, for instance. Okay, what's the smallest microcosm of the culture? All right, the ship. Okay, what ship are
Mhm.
we on? We're on some long haul space freighter. Okay, cool. And why are we here on this long haul space freighter? And what's happening? And then you just build out and build out and build out. And so the reason that I talk so much about world building and the reason that I'm telling you this is because there's a lot of dungeon masters that want to homebrew, that want to build their
Mhm.
own worlds, and they feel intimidated. They feel
Sure.
intimidated by, well, it's an entire world.
What do I do? Where do I start?
Yeah.
Right? It is very cumbersome and sounds bigger than it is. Because I started. I'm like I'm gonna use Eberron, or I always say Eberron. Eberron, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Eberron. I used that as a base, but I didn't study the lore. It was my version of Eberron, and I kept true to the map, and that was basically it. And I'm like, I'm just gonna do this, and I learned like, oh, this area where I have a big town is actually a jungle of wild animals. Oh well, like sometimes I don't know. Are you a module because you like to build the worlds? No modules ever.
So actually, I just finished up a module. I
Oh,
ran
yourself.
no, not
Oh,
writing one.
okay,
Running one because
okay.
I've
Gotcha.
been crapping on modules for like the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I actually have to run a module now so that I can actually crap
What
on the
module?
module.
What module?
So I ran Waterdeep Dragon Heist.
I have that book. I
Uh,
have that book. I love
it
just
was a lot
collecting
of
books
fun.
too.
It was a
Okay.
lot of fun, but if you are a dungeon master for the creativity of building the world, modules will suck your soul.
Yeah, a little bit. Or they make you feel a little overwhelmed because they have. I found there's so many pieces, and I'm like, oh, I could do this. And what I really need to do is give the players the A line and the B line and connect it to their stories. We've been
Yes.
running Icewind Dale, which is a great module and it's one of the most well received. But I'm like, there's so many pieces here. I just need to make this relate to this, and then it's kind of the flow of energy. If anybody I think is into modules, and maybe some people are very different where it's by the book and they run everything to a T. I don't feel like D&D, a good game of that is like that.
No.
Because my other thing too is players, in world building, tell me if you agree with this. Your world's important. How you design it, the ecosystems, the banking systems, all the systems within it. But what players really care about is not the world, it's the story of their character and how
Yes.
they fit in that world. And that needs to be the most important part of the campaign. How does your character story fit in this world? You can have like event A happens to be, but then it all goes to a side to let's tie in how does this character, what kind of it's anime in a way, right? You have the redemption arcs, you have the revenge stories, the love stories, and it's what your character wants. And I
And
think
that
that's important to world building.
I think that you are spot on it because that's not just important to world building; it's quintessential.
Yeah, right.
Um, if you are not, so here we go. We're gonna get on soapbox Bronson. You pulled him out, man.
Okay,
Here it
cool.
comes. If you are not building the world around your players' stories, you're building the wrong world. Because whatever it is that interests your players, whatever it is that revolves around their character, that's the only part of the world that you need to worry about.
Right.
Because I could have this beautifully fleshed out, immaculate city made and ready for a political intrigue campaign, and my players just want to dungeon delve and crush goblin skulls.
Yeah.
They don't care about the politics. They don't care about the political intrigue. They just want to go adventure and explore the countryside.
The political intrigue needs to come to them.
Exactly, right? And so now they need to move into that environment. And okay, so here then you are building the world. What I refer to it as is real-time rendering,
Yeah.
right? Just
It's a
like
good
in a
term.
video game, the world renders as you look. It's the same thing in D&D. If our players are, side quest, you need to be rendering the world in that direction.
Okay. I like that. I agree fully. I think in modules, you can do it with a module, I feel like too.
Yeah.
Like again, that start playing games. I was gonna say if you started doing that, you would make tons of money because I know how you prep. And so I'd be curious to see you start DMing professionally. So I'm just throwing it out there. But I feel like that some of those professional DMs will run modules, but they've run them so many times. Because like I'm sure you have one shots that you've ran multiple times for a group, right?
Oh
Like you
yeah.
have, yeah. And I feel like it's like different types of performance art, like a stand-up or like someone that's done their bit so many times.
Yeah.
You add little bits of flavor, like this one time I had the bartender be a gnome, and people thought that was funny. Let me keep that. Or this time they want it to be a tough dwarf, right? You can change up little things to make it fresh, but it hits like it intrigues other people. You can't recreate every group, but you can give them pieces that people liked, and you can kind of fish it out. But
So,
go ahead.
and the best part about that, as you start recycling, if you will,
Yeah, it is.
environmentally minded as we're world building and we're recycling, all of my campaigns are set in the same world.
Mm.
And so it's absolutely I absolutely love it when a player hears a piece of content from a campaign years ago, and they look at me and they say, "Did I do that?" And you go,
Oh
"Yes, yes,
yeah,
you
dude,
did."
that is the best. It's the
Yeah,
best.
and it's because, that you've built this world. Why not reuse it? It's sitting there. And so it's always fun for players to see, oh, hey, my player is an NPC and he owns this thing, or he's a landed baron over in some mountainside, and it's great. It's super fun, and that creates a
Yeah,
meta, I don't know, landscape for your players to traverse as they are
the
sifting through
domino,
all
right?
of that. Yeah,
You
sifting
set
through
the
all that lore.
domino. Yeah, the long payoff where you as a DM like I'm setting this, and I know there's going to be a payoff in 6 months. It's delayed satisfaction, but everybody loves it, right?
Yes.
I think my favorite. I'm a huge One Piece anime fan. I've been reading the manga since I was a kid too, and I think there's some great storytelling of things like talk about something that you have had a long payoff for, right? Because it's thousands of chapters deep. But I think players appreciate that. What's been the best payoff? And let's do some more trade stories. What's the
Ooh.
best payoff? Like you talked about, what's a nugget that a player did, and you that moment? When did you get that moment in the campaign? What's one of your favorite one of those? That this effect was huge.
So I actually this last so I ended 3 campaigns in December,
Okay.
so that I could start fresh campaigns this year here. And so all of my campaigns have been weaving and intertwining over the last 2 years. And just as I wrapped up one of these campaigns, something has happened to a player where a deity that a different campaign unlocked, right? They released this other deity, and this
Nice.
player looks at me and says, wait a second. Like, this was in the chat just the other day, as he's realizing, wait, this is that person? Like, hold on, man. And then the other guy at the table who's playing in both campaigns is just literally like salivating at the
Oh
deliciousness of the moment,
yeah.
because he was there when that god was released and crushed skulls and killed 3 members of the party, and it was just as he's enjoying that moment. And that's the meta story that is juicy. That's the meta
Right.
story that people love, and it's a really glorious thing to see.
Yeah, I think my table. So I told you I like rolling tables, right?
Hmm.
And I'll do it for NPC sometimes, where they have to meet someone. My players got the deck of many things, and one player got the card where if you duel somebody, you gain a level. And
Okay.
then so they had the idea, I'm just gonna go start a fight at a bar with someone. And we made like a canonical. Our version of Applebee's is called Cherry Wasps. And I basically just wanted to go, sir, you're in an Applebee's. I want to
I'm
give
writing it down.
yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Cherry wasps.
Cherry Wasp, please put that in your world for me. So Cherry Wasp, he gets in a fight with some halfling and just beats him up horribly, right? And I was like, huh, what's a consequence that could come from that? And 10 sessions down, they're doing some game and they're met by this ominous halfling that has a disfigured face. And they couldn't put it together. And he's like, why does this guy hate me? And then something happened where I'm just like, wait, are you the guy with Cherry Wasps? And everybody loved it. Like, what's the consequence? And there's this whole arc where he ruined this guy's wedding day. He destroyed his life. That guy was disfigured and he was out for revenge. And they ended up killing him. They pushed him off a cliff.
Oh
But
man.
it was a great, like, oh, there is some things there. I love a good, right. So, also, a long joke is great too.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
running gags.
Awesome.
I feel like there's a lot of intersect between comedy in D&D and tabletop role playing. What tabletop in the
Hmm.
world building? Do you pull from other games ever, like Pathfinder or
All the time.
all the time? Because you're a big home brewer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will rip if I find a mechanic that I like. I will rip it and I will use it and I will bend it towards whatever campaign I'm running,
Mm-hmm.
however I can.
Right.
Um, so, for instance, Phoenix Dawn Command has the torch system, and what that does is it provides items in the environment that if you interact with that item on your turn, you essentially kind of get a sort of advantage, right? And
Yeah.
so what that does is forces people to think about, ooh, how can I role play my combat so that it sounds cool? I'm gonna swing off of the rafters, sort of thing. Oh, excellent! You used the rafters. Here's advantage on your thing, and it helps people tell the story better. You get Blades in the Dark with the clock system. I love the Dread Tower. I use the Jenga Tower all the time. Anything that needs a timer, I will use the crap out of it.
Yeah. I like that. Okay, good. I'm gonna take that. Yeah, I'm cool from taking mechanics or designing subclasses. I think Critical Role with the gunslinger, and that's a Pathfinder class. That's something that I'm like, oh, you can have guns in D&D because when you pull from inspiration and world building, are you pulling from? Do you like time periods or do you like to blend time periods too? Or Sean is one of my players, or perhaps run across a bar and miss your attack. Yeah, he did this whole thing where he's like, I'm gonna run across the bar and jump off of and hit this guy in the head. I was like, well, roll acrobatics, right? You're conscious. He's like, it's a 12. You think you're doing it, but you're so intoxicated, you just walk and jump.
You totally missed. It didn't work.
It didn't work. Yeah.
Right off the end.
Right at the end. But do you think do you like to stick to a certain theme, or is a different place a different like time era in a way for you? How do you do that with your campaigns?
So how much like
Like, is
technology
it
we're mixing in?
technology, or is it all old knights, or is this place more of a shaman style Native American indigenous people type place? Like blending different types of histories to the, again, I like to think of ecosystems. Like if you run a desert campaign,
Yes.
what kind of cities are in the desert?
Yeah. So that is actually how a lot of my campaigns operate. I have my medieval fantasy campaign. I've got my Rising Tide on the Seas campaign. I've got my Great Green Sea campaign where there's a lot of airships and things like that. And these are all happening simultaneously. The piece of real world trivia that I just love to throw around is at the same time the Incan Empire was rocking and rolling and keeping track of stories on knotted ropes, the spring-loaded clock was being invented in Spain.
Yeah.
The technology, there's a reason technology tree play in like 4X games are huge. Because
are you a Civ guy too? I can see you.
I'm definitely a Civ guy.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
But the reason that exists is because in real life, there was for instance, when the Americas were colonized and they were encountering indigenous populations, and these people had their own culture. They were fully developed, millions of people, and they were just considered inferior because of the technology that they had in their culture. And that happens all of the time in my Dungeons and Dragons campaigns.
Okay. Yeah, because for me too, I think like having a historical period is great and talking to players against such heroes, but also a big part of DMing, and I say this in the most loose way, it's there's a meme about it. Time to do the greatest plagiarism I've ever done in my life, where you're taking it from every right,
Here we go.
Here we go. Okay, so you're big on that too. Okay.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
if you're watching a story or you're reading a story or you're watching a movie and you're like, ooh, that's a great line, man, I can't tell you the number of times I have ripped lines from villains in movies.
My issue now is, this is D&D. Everything D&D in my head. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I can see this there.
Yeah,
I fully get it. For me, big inspirations are video games. Final Fantasies, obviously. Final Fantasy 6 is a big one for my big campaign that we've been doing for 2 years now, almost 2 years, and it's still going. And then I love pulling stuff like in our Icewind Dale campaign. I made a materia system for weapons where you use jewel crafting, and they give, because sometimes I didn't like everyone just getting it. You could build your weapon to have a +6 to ice damage or fire damage, right? You could do that, or you could do certain things. I think that's cooler than me just giving like, here's this cursed sword. Now build it out and make it stronger, and you could get one sword later and find things, right?
Right.
What are some resources you pull from? What are your inspirations in that sense?
I'm a big literature guy.
Okay.
So I used to have a pretty large commute. So I would consume audiobooks and just whenever I'm driving, I'm consuming an audiobook. And so the keyword consume, I absorb a lot of fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, anything, and I will draw
Brandon
inspiration
Sanderson, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
He is a great world builder. I struggle to care about his characters,
Mm,
but yes, he is an excellent. If you want an example of how to build a world, you go to a Brandon Sanderson workshop, and he will work wonders. But man, I can't care about his characters.
um, have you ever read the Sword of Shannara, or have you done any of those by Terry Pratchett?
Yes, I enjoy Terry.
Yeah, I just
I
bought his book this summer, and I'm like, okay, it's on my nightstand to read.
Yeah, and it's that list just keeps on going. All those Shanra books, there's so many of them, so you will not be short of any content there.
Right, because here's the other thing. I talked about this with Dan. At some point, it's kind of like The Simpsons did it. Your players will be like, "Oh, it's like this thing." I can have an original idea, and my
Right.
friends will be like, "Oh, it's like Endgame." And I'm like, "No, it's like every anime time skip. What are you talking about? It's
Right.
not Endgame." It's funny where your friends go because you can see what like your really smart friends will be like, "Oh, this is like Moby Dick." Like they'll make the
Right.
literary, and then your friends that watch the popcorn movies will find some movie reference. So you're like, "I guess, yeah, we're all copying something, right?"
Well, and
Uh,
I actually use that
yeah,
whenever I'm describing things. I will use scenes from movies, and my players give me a hard time about it. But I think what it does is it helps you depict something or paint the picture where you might feel your words are falling short.
yeah,
Because I
yeah.
could sit here and uh, describe describe it into oblivion, or I could just say,
You know
you
that
know,
scene?
yeah,
Yeah.
you know that scene from Terminator where she's holding the fence and the nuclear explosion goes off and you can see her skeleton as the flesh is blown off. That
I
right
love
there.
it.
That's what
I love
happened
it.
to your
Yeah. Well, I'm
character.
like, yes, I got it. I
Yeah,
got it.
exactly.
We have a house rule, and I think you'll like this one if you like cherry wasps. It's everyone can have one canonical real world person in game. So because
Oh,
it started with oh, who was the first Sean's in here? Someone said something about Keanu Reeves being their favorite actor in our camp. I go, oh, Keanu Reeves is in the world now. Obviously, if your character's favorite actor, and so the running joke is Keanu does all the movies in this world, right? That they people watch on Milestone. But now he's in the game. Like they met him. He's like a really strong, like there's a payoff to that. Because they're big time heroes. And Keanu's actually one of the big bads. No, it was Meech, Sean. I just remember it was Keanu Reeves was the one. And I'm like, let me just Google it. Keanu Reeves as a paladin, and there was pictures of it. People
oh,
made D&D
guaranteed. Yeah.
guaranteed. So we all get one. But like I think doing the voices is sometimes a silly thing too. Because I think how often are your players doing the voice for their characters? Is it or does it depend on the player? Do you think?
It depends on the player, and I have a couple players that are like really good about committing to their character, and
Mhm.
they stick to it. I have a couple players that do it periodically, but they do it, and then I have a couple players that are like, my player does this or my
Okay.
character does this, and all three are acceptable.
Right. Right. And then sometimes the other players will draw it out of the other, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the problem. My problem is keeping the same voice accent for a character. That's true too. You got to know your range if you're committing to a voice. That's in chat. Well, like that last week with them, I had to do a Jerry Seinfeld because of the picture icon. Because we do everything digitally because we have players in California and it's
Uh-huh.
spread out. And they're like, "Is that Jerry Seinfeld?" And I'm like, "Are you using your character?" And like, "Yeah." Can you do the voice, Casey? It's like, no. And of course, you got to do the voice, right? Because you're the DM. And I'm sure you probably get in the character too, because the DMs have to be the biggest storytelling nerd of them all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do commit to the voice.
Hmm.
And here's a little bit. I've been told this isn't entirely. I love building NPCs with my players.
Same. That's what the
Um,
roll table is. What my kind of mechanic for that.
yeah, and so I will say, hey, what is one thing that your player notices about them?
Oh,
And they say, well, he's bald. Oh,
okay.
okay. What's something that you're to the next person at the table? What's something that you feel when you look at him? I feel cold. Like when you get goosebumps when you eat a
Mm,
popsicle. I'm like, oh, okay, excellent. And so as my players start feeding me these cues for what this NPC looks like, I like to just kind of start
drifting into
Drifting into
character
right.
and building who this person is and who they're imagining, and I consume and I create, and
Right.
I love it.
That's
And so you
good.
just do that with your
Yeah.
players, and you build the NPC right there, and then suddenly the thing that they imagined is right there at the table with them. It's a
Sure.
lot of fun.
Sure. And then the voices too. I'm good at animal sound, so that helps. Everyone found out I could do a bear sound last week just from years of playing video games. But yeah, sometimes you take your players long. My favorite thing is when your accent or your character, your impression is 75% decent. You know, it's not 100%, but it's enough where you're like, oh, that's who they're doing. And it's not bad. I like surprising, get the Morgan. Andy Dufresne. You gotta get him to get, just get them in there, whoever they pulled in. I think, well, like for players too, how often do you think help a player design a character or come up with a backstory? Because in session 0, I've helped characters do that, but I always like to pitch an idea if they're kind of stuck. I go, hey, because as a DM, my other running joke is I have a whole list of characters I'm never going to get to play that I write. I'm like, oh, this would be a cool character.
Yeah.
How do you help guide that process?
What I recommend to players more than anything is before they even give themselves a backstory or where you're from or what you did or how you came to be, establish your bonds, traits, personalities, and flaws. Establish
the flaws, the biggest, I think.
And those 4 things, those 4 boxes on everyone's character sheet that inevitably get left blank unless you just auto-generated them or something. Those 4 things are huge in how you'll actually play your character.
Right.
And then I like to leave the backstory open, or I'd like my players rather to leave the backstory open so that we can explore that together. And so that as you ask perhaps kind of a role play warm-up question, I enjoy.
I think those are huge too. Beginning every session, do that for your characters. It gets them in. It buy in. It makes up funny things you can make content later. Like, exactly. Oh, really? Let me write that down. The 6-month payoff.
Yep. And that way you have those things and you have a steady supply of them because you keep doing those role play warm-up questions and you do your campfires. That's another thing that I really enjoy doing is, okay, how do you know that person at the table? And it brings everybody to the table together and in the same direction right out the gate. There's no awkward session of, okay, well, I guess we're going to go pull the thing off the job board and we'll go do this adventure. No, you guys are already together. You know each other. You met each other 6 months ago because you told me during the campfire. And you're able to take that little bit of backstory and build with it. So
the other thing I always wonder about is the metagaming aspect, right? Because some people want to talk about, well, if we did this, and I my big thing I always try to challenge the player, and it's hard, and maybe you can give me some advice because I know you're so skilled and you're so passionate, is do it as your character, right? Like, how would your character convey this idea? Say it as a character, right? Or what's your stance on metagame? Because there's sometimes they can come up with a plan, right? Every team, I've come to the conclusion my players have a text group without me where they're plotting against me to ruin my great time. And again, that's fine. That's fine, right? But how do you get them to play their character without metagaming it, if that makes sense? What's your advice there?
I actually don't worry about it.
You don't? That's a good reason too, right? Like, let it happen a little bit till it gets a little egregious.
Yeah. And so like it's one thing if someone's like, oh, the troll has, vulnerability to fire. Like, okay, does your character understand that?
Does your character have that knowledge?
Right.
Like, can he pass that on, or are you just Googling it and being a jerk? Right.
But then on the other hand, okay, how are we going to assault this fortress? I will leave the room. I'll go refill my drink. I'll get my snackies ready. Like I will give them all the time that they want, within reason, until they come up with a plan. I'm totally cool with that because I know that as soon as the dice start rolling, the plan that they came up with is out the window, just like my plan every single week.
Yeah, like exactly. That's what I'm always. Whenever they say that, I was like, yeah, just keep telling me you're playing out loud. Great idea.
Well, and
because it's set in stone back here, guys. Don't worry.
There's
wink.
Literally, I'm back here with like 3 words written on a piece of paper, man.
Yeah,
Like,
so
there's
I
nothing
tend
going
to
on
shuffle
back here.
paper. Nothing's there.
Yeah.
No. My favorite too is sometimes just give them a puzzle, and if they do something cool, you're like, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
You just go.
OSR puzzles, 100% of the time.
So what's an
I-
ORS puzzle for those that are
So
newer?
an OSR puzzle is an old school revival or old school Renaissance puzzle, and it is what I would refer to as an open-ended problem.
Okay.
The players encounter a problem. How do we solve the problem? And you 100% is what I would call a utility puzzle.
Yeah.
It allows your players to get off of their stats, take a look at their skills, and actually use those skills and role play together. Okay, well, the penultimate example, cross the canyon. You know, the old rope bridge is broken. How do we cross the canyon? Oh, well, I'm just going to Misty Step across. Okay, but like I don't have that. How am I going to get there too? And so then they have to sit there and think, okay, well, I can fly, and we can maybe like throw the halfling, and okay, yeah. Then you watch as everyone's gears start turning, and they start working together and role playing together, and then they try, and we're gonna roll some dice and see how
Yeah.
it goes. And
Let's
that is awesome. That's an awesome puzzle.
Let fate take care of it.
Yeah.
And then it's the worst when the fate god, you're like, dang it. Like, you're like, these rolls suck.
Well, and that is where we as dungeon masters have to remember, can we give them as much as you can before you need to roll the dice?
Yeah.
Whether it's information, whether it's abilities, like don't make him roll the die or scale a rope. He's got like a 17 index. Like he's able to do that. Don't worry about it. It's when, okay, well, I'd like to like shoot an arrow. Dude, you're hanging from a rope. We're definitely going to need an acrobatics check. Yeah.
Feet. Yeah,
we're going to need an acrobatics check to see how this goes here, right?
I would like to run up the giant snake monster, do a triple misty flip, shoot it in the top of the head. All right, you need that's a 22. You do it. Like that's the worst too.
That's what I'm talking about. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Okay, yeah. But roll. Yeah. Like how often do you say challenge rating this? Do you ever do you like to let a player know that sometimes? I think sometimes for the dramatics, right? You got to throw it out there.
So I don't. I can't say that I ever do.
Okay.
I will tell people this is going to be difficult, and that's like anything over 15. Like, hey, this is difficult, or this is going to be nearly impossible for your character. Like, I'm more than willing to give them that.
But you won't say a DC. You won't give them the number.
Like I'm not going to give them a number because then they'll just sit there and number crunch. And then someone will be like, oh, well, I can give you guidance, and like, okay, we'll number crunch it some more. And like, how can we solve that?
Mm-hmm.
That's too meta. That's two numbers. Like that takes us out of the moment right there. And I would prefer that they consider what their character would do. What's cinematically cool and exciting? All right, that sounds cool. It'll be really tough for your character. Are we cool with that? Yeah, let's go for it. Okay.
Yeah.
And then you get something fun out of that.
I think 15 hard, then 20 is the next level, very hard. 25 is incredibly hard, and then 30 is almost impossible, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of the number you have to have depending on the modifier.
Yeah, that ballpark.
Yeah. Sometimes I want to let them know too why they're mid rolling. When they commit, though, I still think it's like, okay, you're mid commit, you're committing to this roll. I confirm it and go, okay, DC 17, and like, oh man, and like,
okay.
Just to see, and then you see the butt pucker up, like, oh,
no.
You're like,
okay, this is harder than I thought it would be.
Yeah,
that's cool.
When you get them rolling, that's my tip for it. If you want to tell someone DC, you have to agree they commit to it, and when they start rolling it, you go, the DC's this.
I do like that.
Okay. But I liked what you're saying too, because you got to make it special, right? If you do it every time, then everyone knows, and then you're showing your cards. My players were giving me a hard time because my rolls weren't showing up on Roll20 because we play digitally because it's to the GM. And I go, guys, traditionally the rolls don't, the GM doesn't show the rolls. And you know what? I'm not going to show you anymore. I don't have to, sir. You're going to have to believe me.
So then I have a question for you.
Okay.
Do you fudge the rolls?
No. Sometimes my thing is this. I'm okay with after a couple rolls, if there hasn't been a hit and I look at the numbers that have been happening, I go, I'm going to lower this AC. I think there's adjusting versus fudging. Like if their rolls are really low and there's just been bad luck. I'm like, you know what? This was AC 16. Let's just make it 14.
Mhm.
Let's just, I want to speed up combat because sometimes that can be the thing too. Or, their wisdom modifier is this, right? Like, I'm okay with that. I think fudging a roll doesn't honor the dice gods,
Right.
like the bigger thing is the dice tell the story too.
Yeah.
Right. And I think consequences are big too. I had a thing where my players in our campaign, there was a church and they never visited the church, right? And that's okay. But there were some events that happened in the church that they didn't know about. And so there's this giant cataclysmic event that they didn't correlate to this big time change, right? And that's okay. Their choices made, and there's really cool storytelling. But if I had been like, and you save these meteor things, I think that would be okay. Or when a character dies, I think if I fudge that roll, I think you take out the aspect of the game where there are stakes that matter. Right. So I want people to fail. Sometimes, and it sucks. Sometimes you're like, sorry, dude, doesn't work, right? But sometimes your players do the thing where like, I want the kitten to in my backpack to hold the snowboard while I'm spinning in the air and do, okay, you need that. That's a natural. You're like, God bless it. You can't do anything because you call it, that's where I give a DC check and they roll it and they get it. And you're like, well, all right, you do it. Cool. Great.
You did the thing.
Yeah, you did the thing. I mean, it's awesome. Totally wild. But fudging rolls, I think changing your character sheets to match the dice that night is okay, right? And I think it's okay not to use your best moves all the time. Sometimes the character can be done like a big BBGE should be. I have this theory, and tell me if you agree with this. As a good GM, I don't want your characters to die. I don't want them to fail. But also, I don't care if they do. Like, if your character dies or you guys fail, all right, new game. Like, I can move on. This story is cool, and I would love to tell this story. But if your guys die, that's the story. And then we can talk about a story about the next adventure coming in that can clean up your mess. Like, what's the outcomes, right? Like, let's go from there. Maybe this group ends the cycle of death, What's your stance on fudging rolls?
I will fudge rolls.
That's fine. Yeah, I also think it's okay. I don't think there's a way or not to, right?
But I think the reason that I fudge rolls is for the exact same reason that you're mentioning.
Okay.
It's if I do fudge rolls, it's generally in the favor of my players.
Like if I got a nat 20, it misses.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
That's I think that happens sometimes, right?
And so the reason that I do that is to maintain balance.
Yeah.
Because I'm a home brewer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't used something out of the monster manual in years. Like I just haven't.
Same. I take a base from a monster manual and I up it or down it. Like
and
it's really
I change it, and I'm like, ooh, I want that ability, and you know what? It needs to be a little bit sturdier, but easier to hit or whatever, and I will morph the crap out of that into whatever I need it to be. Right. And sometimes, regardless of how experienced I am with that, I mess it up.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm just rolling on. I'm on fire.
Right. Sometimes your rolls are hot. Right. Yeah.
Oh man, and it's just not a good story. And that's why I'm playing this game for the storytelling.
Yeah. Same.
I'm here to enjoy the story, to make a story together. And if the story is, you guys laid the best plan ever, like you did all the things right, and then this thing just comes in and just like wastes you guys. That was my bad. That was my balance problem. And so I will change whatever I need to make that intense. Now, if a player plays a stupid game and wins a stupid prize, congratulations. There you go, bud.
Yeah,
like that's it.
Yeah. Hey, you lost an eye.
Yeah.
Sorry. Like that's always a cool story. Kind of like you lose a limb. They did what that can happen. You're like, oh, death is real. Like, that gives them the scare a little bit. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But I also run kind of a meat grinder campaign, so a lot of I don't have to try very hard to kill my players. It happens.
Dang, you're rough. We've had no death. Well, they had an NPC die that they actually started liking in my big main session, and it was because I said like he's not responding, kind of to give him a hint, like, hey, he's on death's door, and I was doing the death save rolls behind the screen, and then when the end of the battle, because they hadn't checked on him, he was dead. You know, and there was a big character turn too. I think those kind of consequences where the player don't know. I'll be honest about those rolls. And sometimes you kill. How often do you just kill? You spool in the chat. You barely said anything. I clearly said he's not responding. You know, they're all butthurt about it. They're all butthurt. I love my players. But how often do your players ever hold a grudge against you? They're all scarred. They're like, too soon. Every time I bring up Yancey Sparkle Belt, can you guess what he was? By the way,
Yancey Sparkle Belt.
He was a gnome. He was a gnome. Clearly.
Players holding things against me,
getting butthurt a little bit. Not really like where they're holding a grudge, but they're like, man, I can't believe you did this.
I've seen it. I have seen it, but it's been because, and that's the whole thing, is because we care, right?
Yeah, right. It's not a bad thing.
Right. Passion is not a bad thing. And they've understood, like, hey, we talked about it like adults. We figured it out, and we figured out where we were coming from. It was like, hey, man, like, there's a reason they're the big bad evil guy, because like you guys were messing around with the wrong people, and yeah, he just sat there and he knifed you in the chest a few times, bud. Yeah. And I'm sorry that you were already unconscious, and like that ended it for you, man. Like the end. And so it was just kind of like, man, I just wanted more for that character, and that's cool. Right. That's awesome. That means that your player is invested in your game, and that should be a compliment.
Yeah, death sucks, but there's also options for death. Like, be creative in your storytelling as a player. Like, go make a pact with the devil, or go make a pact with get a resurrection druid. There's a side quest there for you. If you really love the character, talk with the group, right? Okay, this character can come back. Also, level 1 character dies super easy. It's awesome. Like, the game is so cool. And then when you homebrew stuff, you give them an item, you're like, oh, they're OP now, right?
Yeah,
you don't realize
here's one sometimes.
For you. Okay.
I haven't seen a player 1 character at my table ever.
Man, you've never done a 1. What's your starting level? 3?
5.
Wow. Okay. Are you an XP or milestone guy?
Milestone.
Yeah, same.
And
XP is fine if you like to crunch the numbers and you like to see that. I just think it's after time for me.
But then, so my problem with XP is if you start them with XP, everything is XP.
Right. Oh, what did I get for this? They only care about that and not the
They are counting the XP, and they're like, okay, I only need 372. That tavern keeper looks perfect. Like, no,
murder
man,
hobo.
Stop it.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, I have started campaigns at level 10.
Right.
Because I mean, when's the last time you saw a high level campaign? I also don't run campaigns past 15.
So you've never done a 1 to 20, or have no interest in doing that?
I have no interest in that. Anything before 5 is boring. Anything after 15 is too hard to balance.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Yeah, it's just preposterous, especially if you have like a 6-player party. It's out of control because their abilities are so diverse at that point that you cannot challenge them. You can't challenge your players without, hey, guess what? This is a universe-ending thing. So congratulations. If you fail today, like, the universe dies. And
I think you're right. I think when you go to 15, there's a bunch of events, and then for the final campaign, you're level 20. Like, you make it we go to 15, you're 20, and everything's nuts, and kind of go. I kind of want to do one where everything was hyper leveling, and you level up every session. Yeah, I think that works too. I think if you do a level 1 campaign, you have to, like, level 1 is 1 session, level 2 is 2 sessions, level 3 is 3. Level 4 is 3, level 5 is 3. You get them to level 5 as quick as you can, because I feel like if you're doing a level 1 campaign, it's for all new players, right? I think if you do it all new to teach them the mechanics, because I think some players can get overwhelmed by all the actions and subclasses and reading the chart. So then it kind of teaches them the steps. And then with a more experienced group, starting at 3 or 5 is great. 5's that's everyone wants to get their subclass. That's the big thing, like, because that's where the flavor comes in. It's hard. A hyper leveling one would be good. And so, what's your longest campaign? Is it 2 years? Is that your longest session or longest campaign? Not session.
2 years. Yeah. of monthly sessions, because I only do one session per campaign per month.
Right. How many people are in those same groups? Is it 4 set different groups?
4 different groups. I have 1 or 2 crossovers where they're
Okay.
craving more D&D, so they pick up
You
a
got the
second or
time.
third. Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, I think the most that anyone's in is 2, and then every 5th weekend I do a one shot.
Now that's nice to break up the monotony. How long are your sessions?
Between 3 and 5 hours.
Oh, that's nice. We do about 3 online twice a month, and it's just the one campaign. But we jump between 2 campaigns. We're doing our secret campaign that we started, and then we're doing the Icewind Dale, right, with the same group, where we do 3 and 3. We switch off between them. And I think there's a balance to that too. That's another thing I would tell players. Like, hey, if you like a campaign but want something new, that's okay. Every once in a while, do a one shot, make it, keep it fresh. It's like marriage. You want to keep it fresh. Send them some flowers. Tell them they look cute in that dress.
Play a level 15 villainous one shot.
Yeah. Be baddies, just go kill Santa, right?
Which actually, I ran I think they were level 10 kobold session where they were all kobolds protecting their red dragon's lair while the red dragon was away.
Cool.
And I actually had players, because it was I actually had players play monster block adventurers and invade the dungeon, their lair. And so it was actually a lot of fun. That was a really good session.
That's a cool session. I like that idea. I like the twist on the story too, where you're the random character or random setting too. Like again, the Virgo one, or just the draft one you had is a really good idea. I would love to pull names from a hat and say you're building a character for him, you're building a character for him, and you're building a character for her, right? And everybody gets the character from the opposite, and you're either going to get a friend that's really nice or get a friend that's going to make you something that's so horrible to play. And you're going to see how good you can bend to it, right?
I would never trust that.
No, because there's some players that are like, I don't want to do this.
It would be one thing if the DM was like, okay, we're all playing pre-gens that I made. Pick your spot at the table.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, okay. Ooh.
Yeah. Our campaign was kind of like that, because I was guiding people like, I kind of want to play this. I'm like, okay, you're going to be this, you're going to be this, and you're going to be this based on what we talked about. Like, you told me the class you want. Here's your hook, right? Because they were like, okay, I'm into it. You have to. So there. I think too, for me, we talked about it earlier, like copying everything, right? Plagiarism. To end the show, I always like to have a random subject. And last week we talked about what class is Gandalf, and we can get into that if you want to. But what are your top 3 D&D media, like show, book, video game? Give me 3. Obviously, we talk about people love Vox Machina, Critical Role, but something that is like classic literature that is true D&D to you. That's the essence of D&D. We can take turns if you want to, or I can start.
Okay. So
you
start. You start with that.
My number 1 example of D&D that's in media that you would not think if you didn't play D&D, Princess Bride. The Princess Bride is you got the bard sword fighter rogue, you got the fighter pirate, you got the Goliath giant barbarian. It's a great example of, hey, this is the D&D story. This is an adventure of a party, and it's based in a romance. It's great. And there's enough humor in it too, where because that's the other thing too. D&D event is not just always super serious. There's always your group's humor, because people want to crack jokes. There's the one smart ass player that has to push the limits,
and in that breath, I think we always imagine, Lord of the Rings. We want to start
the goat, right?
The goat, right? We want our campaign to look and feel like the Lord of the Rings. But then inevitably, we all become Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh, that's a great.
And that is definitely the epitome, at least of all of my Dungeons and Dragons.
That's so good. I haven't watched that forever.
Yeah, we start off thinking that we're Aragorn, and we realize that we're just Sir Robin.
Ooh, we got Stranger Things in the chat. Yeah, Stranger Things is fully D&D. I love Monty Python. Love it. My other one is one that's actually a newer thing on Netflix. I've been watching that Shadow and Bone, or it's a high fantasy show. It's based on a book series. and it has magic. It has people of that are kind of like a fighter class or a rogue class. Shadow and Bone's really good. Second season's coming, and I kind of binge watched it. I'm someone you're writing that down. I think if I'm guessing,
Yes.
dude, if you like the high fantasy stuff, I think you're gonna be like, oh, that's really good. Thanks for the rec there. But Shadow and Bone is true. It's the closest thing you have as a continual D. Like obviously, we could talk about Game of Thrones, and that Game of Thrones is a really twisted D&D game. But this is kind of like, oh yeah, this is a high fantasy, serious D&D game to me. It's Shadow.
Right. Like actual high fantasy.
Yeah.
But
there's some like steampunky to it too, right? Because there's these ships that go through desert. So, but if they're magical ships, I don't want to give too much away. You gotta see it. You gotta see it. World of Warcraft in the chat, sure, that is kind of D&D-esque.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm gonna have to source. I don't do much television.
Oh, yeah, you could do a video game. You could do a book. You could.
Yeah, I have television ADHD. Like I can't. I get like 2 episodes in and then I just drift. Like I never come back to it for some reason.
I'm kind of like that these days, where either I have to. This is my night to watch TV this month, and I'm gonna consume half a series, or I'm not interested. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But if anyone wants to know how I run Dungeons and Dragons,
okay,
read the Spellmonger series by Terry Mancour. Hands down, and the great thing about the series is Terry Mancour is an absolute monster, and he puts out a book every 6 months.
Oh, he's one of those writers.
And on top of that, these books are like 500 pages long. Like they're good, solid books. And he's like 13 books in at this point.
He's just constantly punching.
The dude is just chugging. All right, he's a monster. But the Spellmonger series by Terry Mancour. Okay. And if you want to know like how I run D&D, that's how I run D&D.
Okay.
The vibe, the feel, the political intrigue, the technology that happens, like all of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's one I will check out. The Spellmonger. I like a good book. There's a series I like called Ranger's Apprentice that I recommend to the kids I teach, because I teach that like young adult. That's good, and it's kind of D&D-esque. But the one that I think, because the D&D movie's coming out, right?
Right.
And someone was talking about there's been a D&D movie, and in my head, the closest D&D movie is Your Highness with Danny McBride and James Franco. I'm like, oh yeah, that's D&D. Yeah, where they fight the Minotaur. That's as raunchy as D&D gets. That is R-rated D&D. Yes, that is right. Correct. They like D&D. That is a D&D. If you want the D&D experience, watch that. Your Highness with Danny McBride and James Franco.
Who else was that? Who else was in that?
There's a Natalie Portman. Or
I think it might have
been Keira Knightley. It's one of them.
Yeah, but yeah, that is a fun one.
It is Natalie Portman, and Zooey Deschanel's in it, and Justin Theroux. There's a lot of big name actors.
Right? How did they get these people in on this? Because it is ridiculous.
You know what it is? They all play D&D. I know,
Probably.
like in my heart, Charles Dance, who is the evil dad in Game of Thrones,
yeah. So they must have been in somebody's trailer on a different film set sometime playing D&D, and they're like, where's like the real D&D movie? Like, let's make what D&D is really like.
Dan Bryan's like, I got an idea, and I know it's funny. Well, no, because the guy from Magic Mike that's married to Sofia Lagarde, Joe Malinga, he has the big D&D group with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine and Vince Vaughn. Yeah. Like, I want to know what's at that table, because the Game of Thrones runners are part of that game now too. And I'm like, oh, really? They got a killer group there.
That is a killer group.
But what's your final piece of media?
Oh man, I'm actually probably gonna pull. I'm gonna pull from sci-fi. I think.
Go for it. Sci-fi is so D&D. People don't realize a lot of times.
Right, and it's the second Alien movie.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So the first is very, solo thriller, but then the second is very like run and gun. And that just the whole movie, like, hey, go to this place, they find this, the orphan, they're dealing with the xenomorph, like, oh crap, there's a lot of them, and like the whole Alien 2 feels D&D to me.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And there's a lot of good one. Aliens 2 is a good choice as well. Yeah. Aragon. I see that book. World of Warcraft in the chat. Stranger Things. My bonus one is the anime Goblin Slayer or manga, if you want to read that, because it's just about a guy who likes XP. He's an XP player.
He's an XP junkie.
He's an XP junkie.
That's all he's there for.
So Bronson, Allfather Games, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, because I said we'd be here for an hour, but we're having such a good time. Where can people find more of your stuff?
Hey, I'm on YouTube. I'm getting onto Twitch. I'm starting to drift here onto Twitch, so feel free to come on over to Allfather Game Master. I've started a channel. There's nothing on there yet, but every Wednesday, so tomorrow I'll actually be on there. You can watch me as I world build The Rising Tide, a new campaign setting that's starting up this month. I'm all over Instagram. I'm there every day, but I'm actually going to be releasing a book later this year. I'm in the process of editing The Talentless GM. It's a workbook, a work-along workbook on how to build your own worlds and homebrew your tabletop role-playing setting.
Yes. And for those listening to the audio or watching later on YouTube, the description will be in below. If you want to find one of us, Underpowered, we've got a lot of different shows going on. We have our Pokemon show. We have Underpowered Pokemon Hour, where we do the card collecting and talk about rating cards. This week, Shelby's going to be doing a backlog battler. And our D&D actual play will be back March 11th. Sean filled in for me because I had some things to take care of. And we'll be back to but I want to thank everybody that came by to watch. And if